The ghost ship Mary Celeste. I had always been fascinated by the unknown, the unexplained. Perhaps that's why, when I was offered the chance to join a small research crew to investigate the location where the Mary Celeste was discovered, I couldn't resist. The Mary Celeste was the most infamous ghost ship in history, a merchant brigantine found adrift in the Atlantic Ocean in 1872, with its crew mysteriously missing. No sign of struggle, no bodies, just an empty ship floating silently on the waves. The story had captivated me since childhood. How could a crew simply vanish without a trace? I thought that maybe, just maybe, standing where it all happened would help me understand. The ship we chartered was a small weathered research vessel called the Nautilus, captained by a man named Briggs, an unsettling coincidence, considering the Mary Celeste's captain had been named Benjamin Briggs. I didn't mention it, of course. The crew was a quiet bunch, seasoned sailors who had seen their share of strange things at sea, but even they seemed on edge as we approached the coordinates where the Mary Celeste had been found all those years ago. It was a clear, calm day, the kind of day that sailors dream of. No storms, no choppy waves. But as we got closer to the site, something shifted in the air. The light changed, growing dimmer, and a thick, unnatural fog began to roll in from nowhere. I stood on the deck, watching the mist creep toward us, feeling an unease that had nothing to do with the cold. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the weirdness of being out in the open ocean. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The captain's voice crackled over the ship's intercom, snapping me out of my thoughts. "We're almost at the site," Briggs announced, his voice gruff. "Get ready." I grabbed my camera and notepad, the tools of my trade, but as I headed toward the bow, I realized I didn't feel the usual thrill of excitement. Instead, I felt dread. The fog was thick now, swirling around the ship like a living thing. I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me. The sea was eerily calm, the only sound the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. As the ship slowed to a stop, I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see the captain, his face pale in the gray light. "This is it," he said quietly, gesturing to the water around us. "This is where they found her." I nodded, but my throat felt dry. The air here was thick, heavy with an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow every sound. I looked down at the water, half expecting to see something, anything, that would explain the mystery of the Mary Celeste, but there was nothing, just endless, black water. "What do you think happened to them?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Briggs shrugged, his eyes scanning the horizon. "No one knows. Some say pirates, others say they abandoned ship in a panic, but no signs of struggle, no lifeboat. It's as if they vanished into thin air." I shivered, though the air wasn't particularly cold. Something about this place felt wrong, like the ocean itself was hiding a secret, something dark and old. I turned away from the water, trying to shake the feeling, and focused on taking notes. But every time I looked back out at the sea, I felt the same sensation, like I was being watched. Suddenly, the wind picked up, whipping through the rigging and sending a shudder through the ship. The fog thickened, and I could barely see the captain standing next to me. Then faintly I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. A voice, a distant echoing voice carried on the wind. I froze, straining to hear. At first I thought it was just my imagination, or maybe the crew talking on the other side of the ship. But no, it was coming from the water. The voice was low, almost a whisper, but there was something unmistakably human about it. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Before I could respond, the voice grew louder. It wasn't a single voice anymore, but many, dozens, maybe hundreds, rising and falling like the tide. It sounded like people calling out, pleading, as if they were just below the surface, trapped in the depths. I leaned over the railing, peering into the water. The surface was dark and still, but I could swear I saw shapes moving just beneath it, pale and ghostly, like figures reaching up from the deep. My heart pounded in my chest. "What is that?" Briggs didn't answer. He just stared, his face ashen, as the voices grew louder. The crew, too, had gathered at the railings, their faces tense with fear. No one said a word. but I could see it in their eyes. They heard it too. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the voices stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. The wind died, the fog hung heavy around us, and the sea was once again calm. But the air felt different now, charged, like something was watching us from the depths. "We need to leave," Briggs said abruptly, turning on his heel and heading back toward the wheelhouse. "Now!" I didn't argue. I hurried after him, my heart racing, the eerie quiet pressing down on me like a weight. As the captain started the engine and we began to move, I looked back one last time at the spot where the Mary Celeste had been found. The fog was thinning, and for a brief moment, I saw something in the distance. A ship, its sails tattered, barely visible through the mist. My breath caught in my throat. The ship was old, its wood gray and weathered, its mast towering high into the sky. And standing on its deck, just for a moment, I saw figures. Human figures, still and silent, staring out at us as we sailed away. I blinked and they were gone. I wanted to say something, to shout, to ask the captain if he had seen it too, but the words wouldn't come. I could only stand there frozen as the ship disappeared into the fog. For the rest of the trip back, no one spoke. The crew, usually chatty and lively, were silent, their faces pale and drawn. Even Briggs kept his eyes forward, refusing to look back. When we finally reached the harbor, I disembarked without a word. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us, that the ghost ship and its crew were still out there, watching, waiting. I never wrote that story. Some mysteries, I realized, are better left unsolved.